Hey, Rich.
Yeah.
You know how I've recently said never let a good pandemic go to waste?
Yes.
Well, I want to share something with our Daybreak family that I believe will make a difference this summer. And it is right behind me.
Hi, we're Rich and Marcy Burdick, co-directors of Daybreak Camp. Daybreak was established in 1969. That makes this our 51st year of doing ministry. Every summer, we have about 1,500 campers and volunteers come through this camp and use these cabins. These cabins predate the ownership of Daybreak back probably into the 60s. We have not done any major renovations to these cabins in many years. And this year, we have a perfect opportunity to take care of that and make this place the best place for ministry it can be over the next however many years.
See, these cabins are tired and worn. And if you've been a volunteer or a camper here, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
There's been many years of great ministry that's happened here, and we have gone through each cabin with a fine-tooth comb to develop a list of items to be done that will make them not only structurally sound, but aesthetically pleasing.
This could be an amazing opportunity. These cabins need some tender love and care.
And if you think about it, this is the perfect opportunity to do something we just have not had time or resources to do before. Remember this, you are Daybreak. And this is how Daybreak was built, with volunteers from the ground up. And we can go back to those roots and create something absolutely awesome for future years. The God of the heavens, the Ancient of Days, the God of our fathers, and God of my praise, the Alpha Omega, beginning and end, forever and ever, your kingdom will stand. We come before you now. We come to lay our lives down. We will have no other gods before you. Nothing on earth will come before your throne. You are the sovereign I am, and you reign in our hearts alone. We will exalt you on high forever, King of all kings and the Lord of all lords. We will have no other gods before you. Our Maker, Creator, before time began, Messiah and Savior, Redeemer and friend, our rock of salvation, so faithful and true. We give all the glory and honor to you. For you are worthy of our never-ending love. We will have no other gods before you. Nothing on earth will come before your throne. You are the sovereign I am, and you reign in our hearts alone. We will exalt you on high forever, King of all kings and the Lord of all lords. We will have no other gods before you. We will have no other gods before you. Nothing on earth will come before your throne. You are the sovereign I am, and you reign in our hearts alone. We will exalt you on high forever, King of all kings and the Lord of all lords. We will have no other gods before you.
Angry words, oh let them never from my tongue unbridled slip. May the heart's best impulse ever check them ere they soil the lip. Love one another, thus in the Savior, children obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus in the Savior, children obey the blessed command. Love is much too pure and holy, friendship is too sacred for a moment's reckless folly, thus to desolate and mar. Love one another, thus in the Savior, children obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus in the Savior, children obey the blessed command. Let our words be sweetly spoken, let kind thoughts be greatly stern. Show our love to one another with abundance of kind words. Love one another, thus in the Savior, children obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus in the Savior, children obey the blessed command.
Isaiah 12, verses 1 through 6. In that day you will say, I will praise you, O Lord. Although you were angry with me, your anger has turned away, and you have comforted me. Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. In that day you will say, Give thanks to the Lord. Call on his name. Make it known among the nations what he has done, and proclaim that his name is exalted. Sing to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known to all the world. Shout aloud and sing for joy, people of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel among you.
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss! The Father turns his face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon the cross, my sin upon his shoulders. Ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart. His wounds have paid my ransom. But this I know with all my heart. His wounds have paid my ransom.
Well, good morning, church family. This is Phil Weiss. Today, I'm coming to you from my home office. This is where I spend lots of hours a day, and it's been different. It really has. I can't honestly say I've been really excited about it. Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful to be able to be home and to be able to spend more time with my family. But at the same time, because I'm in this room, I can't really spend more time with my family because they're outside that door right back over there and I'm in here. And it's kind of like even being closer is harder. I think one of the things that as we've been going through this pandemic is that, we've had to choose what is our, they call it the quote, new normal. And to be honest with you, I've been fighting this, whatever this new normal is. And I think I figured it out. Have you ever actually been in the Midwest and ever experienced a snow day? Now, for those of you who live in California for your entire lives, and especially over here in the Bay Area, snow day is not a concept that you grew up with as a child. Now, I grew up in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and so when we had snow days, that was kind of a big deal. Actually, snow days were celebratory days because, woohoo, I did not have to go to school. And because I didn't have to go to school, you got to stay home. And you got to do different things, and you got to sled for the day, and maybe get hot chocolate from mom. And those were things that were happy things. But the funny thing about snow days is they were just a day. Maybe two if you got really lucky. But they were just one day. And because they were a day, the snow would then melt, and you would then go back to school. And things were back to normal. It was a short time, and it didn't really affect your life very much. I think what has been a real challenge with this pandemic is it really has seemed to change the fabric of everyone's life. And it isn't a snow day, and it's probably taken me 90 some days to actually realize that. Trying to figure out, why can't things just go back to normal? Why can't we just do what we did before? And much like 9/11 that happened, we realized that it isn't going back to normal. And there is a new psyche that we as a society have. And so I think that's the real challenge. And for those of us like me who are fighting it every step and every tooth and every nail away, it's probably created a lot of angst. For those people who have accepted it, they're figuring out what their new path is, and they're moving forward. I realized that how we approach life, whether we look at things as temporary, as a snow day, or we look at things as this is what the future holds for us, and figure out our path through it so that we are continually being loving and kind and helpful to one another. And in our communion thought today, what I was wanting to realize is, what do the disciples think? Jesus is here for a period of time, and he'll be here for a while, then he'll go. And he's done amazing, miraculous things here on earth, but then he'll be gone. And things will go back to normal, maybe. But Jesus was a change that lasts through the rest of time. And his time here on earth wasn't just a short period of time. It was something that's going to continue on throughout the ages. So when he brought his disciples into that room to break bread, to drink, the fruit of the vine, were the disciples thinking, wow, this is just a short period, and, once he dies, nothing will really change and it'll go back to being what we were? Or will there be a true fundamental change that affects our lives and our souls? I don't know what they thought. But what we do know now is that it is a fundamental change. It is something completely different. It is something that is just amazing to us. For those who believe will have everlasting life. It's not a temporary snow day. It's forever. And that's good news. It really is. And so that's something that we can cling to. That's something we hold on. That's a promise that we know that will come back, that he will come back, and we will have that everlasting life. So as we take this communion today, the fruit of the vine, the bread, I ask that you think about the fact that Jesus is forever. Jesus is our normal. Jesus came to this earth and he died for us and he rose from the grave for us so that we can have changed lives, wonderful changed lives in him forever. So as we take this fruit of the vine and this bread, let's think about those things. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time that you've given us, for this opportunity to take this bread, to be able to take this fruit of the vine, to be able to remember you and to remember what you've done for us. That change that is now lasting throughout eternity, for us to be able to be with you, to believe, to love, to be loved. Lord, thank you for all that you've done for us. We don't understand all those things you've done, but we thank you for them each and every day. And as we take this bread, the fruit of the vine, we ask that we remember, and we remember the love that you have for us. In Jesus' heavenly name, amen.
Well, hello everyone. Phil Weiss here again. And what I wanted to do was give you a brief update on the finances of Tri-Valley and to let you know a few things that are going on. And so what I wanted to let you know first of all is that God continues to bless us in these trying times. We're also faced with some new challenges that we haven't had before. Our income primarily is derived from contributions. And to be honest with you, they're down some. On average, about $383 a week, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you add it up and multiply that by 52, that adds up to about $20,000 a year. Well, to be honest with you, when the shelter-in-place was instituted, I thought the effect was going to be a lot greater. But thanks to many of you who continue to practice regular giving, even some of our members who are afar now, our shortfall is much less than anticipated. Now, also, some of our expenses are less. With the savings on some ministry leaders underrunning their budgets, the savings that we have in utilities and some of our reduced building maintenance, we're also underrunning our budgeted expenses by approximately $11,000 this year so far. Our expenditures in our evangelical areas are currently being fully met. The missionaries we support, our own ministers, they're all fully supported thanks to your contributions. In addition to the usual expenses that we've had due to the pandemic, There's some other things that we are looking at doing a little differently and some additional expenses to incur. As we move to in-person meetings, the need for an online presence is still needed for our higher risk population, and we've also seen that our online services are meeting the needs of even more people than we've expected before. We've had many guests and visitors to our online services over the past 2 months. To continue to do these, we're needing to invest in some additional technology and technology infrastructure to provide video streaming services from our building. This is going to be an increase in our costs going forward. Also, with our meeting space, again, as we change our services to meet the state guidelines for gathering together, there's some additional investments we are going to make to our site and our practices. We, thanks to the efforts of the Johnston family and many others, are updating the courtyard area in preparation for upcoming outdoor services to include shading and furniture to make it a much more usable and inviting space for us and our community members who we want to hear God's word. We need to engage in different cleaning practices and have additional supplies on hand to keep those coming to the building safe. For now, we're looking at single Sunday services, but if we want to have more groups in the building throughout the week, we likely will have higher costs due to increased cleaning needed. With all of these things, God has seasons. Fortunately for us, we've been blessed with many resources over the years, including your generosity and faithful giving in order for us to do God's work together. At the moment, yes, we're running a budget deficit, but we've laid by and stored for draughts as we learn from God so that we can weather the storm and make the needed investments I mentioned earlier. As with every year, I'm about to kick off the budget process for next year, and I'll provide you all with an update again in a few months. If anyone would like to be a part of this budget process, please contact me directly. Our work together is critical, and may God bless us all to labor together and to continue to spread His word.
Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let your love increase. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Walls of pride and prejudice shall cease when we are your instruments of peace. Where there is hatred, we will sow His love. Where there is injury, we will never judge. Where there is striving, we will speak His peace to the people crying for release. We will be His instruments of peace. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let your love increase. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Walls of pride and prejudice shall cease when we are your instruments of peace. Where there is blindness, we will pray for sight. Where there is darkness, we will shine His light. Where there is sadness, we will bear their grief. To the millions crying for release, we will be His instruments of peace. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let your love increase. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Walls of pride and prejudice shall cease when we are your instruments of peace.
morning, Tri-Valley. I am here this morning at my local Safeway store, just doing some grocery shopping. And you might come here yourself. You're probably familiar with doing the grocery shopping. This is a place where you might run into somebody that you know. It's where you go to get the necessities of life. And I'm here a little bit earlier in the morning than normal, and I did that on purpose. The main reason is because I didn't want a bunch of people watching me talk to myself while pushing a cart around the grocery store. But the other reason is because as we watch and learn from Jesus, observe his life, and then ask ourselves as his disciples, how can we be like him and treat people the way that he treated people? We're going to follow him to a place where somebody maybe doesn't want to be seen. It's the off hours time when Jesus goes and meets a woman in Samaria at the well in a city called Sychar. Now this is a well that is actually still functioning to this day. It was a well that was given by the patriarch Jacob. And we're going to see Jesus meeting a woman here on the off hours. We assume maybe she doesn't want to be seen. She's got kind of a sordid past, and maybe does like I do, comes to the grocery store when there's not a lot of other people around so that you don't have to bump into people while you're taking care of your necessities of life. And there's a lot of this story that we could dissect. There's so much richness here. We're not going to study it in incredible depth. But what I want us to focus on this morning is that Jesus goes there. Now the phrase "don't go there," this is something that you may have heard or that you may have used in your life, and it can be used in a lot of different ways. Sometimes people will say "don't go there," referring to something geographically, like, man, this is a bad part of town, don't go there. Another way that people might use this phrase is when somebody starts to talk about a topic or a subject that is socially taboo. We all know that there's those three things that we're not supposed to talk about in polite conversation: religion, money, and politics. And if someone starts down that road, someone might say, hey, don't go there. We're not going to talk about that right now. And the third way that this can be used is if somebody asks a question that's a little bit too personal and somebody doesn't want to go that deep in the conversation. Like say, hey man, I heard that your relationship is a little bit rocky. How's that been going? Someone might say, oh man, don't even go there. But what we'll see this morning is that Jesus goes there in all three of these areas in his encounter with this woman. And in doing so, the result is transformed lives. So let's take a look at this encounter that Jesus has with this woman. And then let's ask ourselves, what does it look like for us to treat people the way that Jesus did? John chapter 4. Jesus knew the Pharisees had heard that he was baptizing and making more disciples than John. Though Jesus himself didn't baptize them, his disciples did. So he left Judea and returned to Galilee. He had to go through Samaria on the way, and eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said, "Please, give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. And the woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan. Why are you asking me for a drink?" So the first thing we see is that Jesus goes there geographically. He literally goes to Samaria rather than traveling around it to avoid having to interact with those Samaritan people. And that's what Jewish folks did in that day. If you were from Galilee and you were on your way home from Jerusalem, you would go around, sometimes through Jericho. We even see this in the Gospels. Sometimes Jesus does this, but this time he doesn't. What's the problem with Jews and Samaritans? Well, they kind of have this long history of bad blood. Samaritans had occupied some of the lands that the Jews had returned to when they came back from the exiles. Samaritans claimed they were the true descendants of Abraham, and there was kind of trouble ever since. It's weird, though, that these two groups ever decided that they would be enemies in the first place, because they have so much in common, especially compared to everybody else in the ancient world. Both groups believed in the one true God. Both groups believed that God had chosen people to be a blessing to all nations. And both groups were dedicated to keeping the Torah, but they allowed their differences to come between us. This is a good place for us to stop and ask ourselves, where are we unwilling to go geographically? Maybe the inner city? Poor neighborhoods, places where homeless people gather. What types of places or people in society do you avoid? Maybe it's young people, maybe it's old people, loud people, sick people, dirty people. What about in the church? Do you interact with or build relationships just with people who are like you, people who have similar economic status or similar interests? I think if we're honest, we all have our own version of going around Samaria. As long as we continue to do that, we allow dividing walls to remain between us and between people that we're called to love and serve. We need to identify and admit to these prejudices and evaluate how much influence they actually have on our walk with the Lord. We see here and throughout the Gospels that Jesus was willing to find himself in some of those don't go there places in order to show love and to bring hope to people. When Lisa and I lived in Memphis, our church spent a lot of time going into the rough parts of the city to serve food, to share the gospel, meet needs, and just to have conversations and show love with people. And I have to admit, it made me very uncomfortable because these parts of the city were dirty and they were unpredictable and kind of scary. Being unfamiliar with this environment, my imagination would run away with me when I was in these kinds of places. Like, what's going to happen to me? What's the worst thing that could happen? I preferred to just stay in the suburbs where it was safe. But the more we did it, the more we went downtown, the better I got at it, the better understanding I had of the kind of people who lived there and what kind of opportunities presented themselves there. Exposure takes away the boogeyman factor and kind of replaces it with a heart for love and service. So in being willing to go there geographically, Jesus also goes there in the sense of bucking common cultural norms that were taboo at the time. We need to realize that we hear this story very differently than the first century hearers would have heard it. We hear this story, we go, okay, it's Jesus and it's a woman, they're having a nice little conversation by the well. And the way we might respond is with this emoji. But John's original hearers would have responded with this emoji. It would have been the surprise, the shocked face emoji. Why is that? Because what Jesus does here is buck a lot of first century social norms. And I want to list some of them for us. And I've enlisted some help from some of the young people in our congregation, giving us the appropriate response that we should have if we're hearing this through first century ears. First of all, Jesus, a Jewish man, talks to a Samaritan.
What?
Not only that, he talks to a Samaritan woman.
What?
I'm sorry to say, but religious conversations was for the menfolk during this time. Women didn't do that. Women did things like draw the water. He talks to a Samaritan woman, and she happens to be a woman of ill repute.
What?
No way.
We find out later that she's had 5 husbands, and now she's shacking up with a guy that's not her husband. This might be the reason that she was drawing water during the off hours of the day, so she doesn't have to deal with people and their stares and their pointing and their whispering. And as if that weren't enough, Jesus talks to a Samaritan woman of ill repute, and he does it alone.
Unbelievable.
Something that rabbis would not have done at this time, had an unchaperoned conversation with a woman. And on top of all of this, he asks her for a drink from her water jar.
What?
So yeah, the appropriate response to what Jesus does here is shock, confusion, disbelief. John says when Jesus' disciples came back from buying food in verse 27, they were shocked to find him talking to a woman. But none of them had the nerve to ask, what do you want with her? Why are you talking to her? And then in verse 9, the woman herself was surprised that Jesus would stop and have anything to do with her. What's the problem? What is everybody so concerned about? Well, this is the way things are, because if Jews and Samaritans start meeting together and talking and sharing their water jugs, well, what? What will happen? Let's find out what happens. We'll see what happens next in this story. Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me and I would give you living water. But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket," she said, "and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think that you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" And Jesus replied, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water that I give will never be thirsty again. It will become a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life." "Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water, and then I'll never be thirsty again. And I won't have to come here to get water." So because Jesus broke social taboos in order to go there, Jesus was able to offer her living water. This is an image that Jesus uses in the book of John to describe salvation through him. And when you go there, despite unfounded social taboos and norms that are keeping people apart, you are able to offer people living water that Jesus is talking about. You're able to offer them life in its truest sense, life that is everlasting. And when we don't go there, we tend to keep this living water to ourselves and our own group of people. People who are comfortable on their side of boundary lines don't think that there's a problem. They think that everyone is living in peace. Samaritans? Oh, yeah. We stay away from them, they stay away from us. This is how it's been for years, and you know what? Everybody's fine with it. Here's the thing, we'll just go around Samaria on our way back from Jerusalem. We don't need their contaminated water from that well anyway. You guys, this is the system, and it's fine. It works, everybody's happy. But it doesn't work. That's a very clear way of saying, I don't have to care about you. Breaking these boundaries, especially in order to share Jesus' living water with people, is a very clear way of saying, I do care about you. I've talked before about the biblical concept of shalom. This is the Hebrew word for peace, but it really means so much more than just our simple definition of peace. Shalom peace isn't just the absence of conflict. The biblical concept of shalom means the best possible growing conditions, the best possible environment in which someone can live and thrive. And you can have absence of conflict and still not have shalom. Think about a field that doesn't have any water, or an unhappy couple who haven't spoken to each other or slept together in months. That's not peace, that's neglect. And Jesus doesn't do neglect. Jesus talking with the Samaritan woman would have been seen as shocking and pointless and purposeless to the people who might have encountered that. And our efforts as Christians to be agents of God's shalom in the world might draw the same reaction from people. You don't need to do that, it's unnecessary. But if we want to be like Jesus, we push through the criticism to bring shalom and that living water to people. Well, after this exchange, Jesus goes there in the third sense of making things personal and awkward in the conversation. Listen to this. She asked for living water. Jesus says, well, go and get your husband. I don't have a husband, the woman replied. Jesus said, you're right. You don't have a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth. Sir, the woman said, you must be a prophet. So tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim that it's here at Mount Gerizim, where our ancestors worshipped? Jesus replied, believe me, dear woman, the time is coming where it no longer matters whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him. For salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming. Indeed, it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. For God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. And the woman said, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called the Christ. And when he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus told her, I am the Messiah. Now, at first glance, it seems like Jesus is shaming this woman for how many relationships she's had, and outrightly saying the Jews are better than Samaritans when it comes to worshiping and understanding God. But keep in mind, Jesus doesn't go there just so that he can heap abuse on this woman. He goes there seeking to give her life that truly is life. Well, how does he do that in this awkward conversation? Well, first he offers her living water, and then he reveals that he knows that her love life has been quite a mess for some time. Now, we don't know, as readers of this story, if her 5 marriages ended in divorce or death. We don't know if she sinned in these relationships or if she was sinned against. But either way, that's a lot of emotional baggage to have to carry around. No wonder she changes the subject when Jesus brings it up. So why does Jesus bring it up? He's talking about this living water that stays with you. It's something that comes up from inside you where God's Spirit dwells. And it cleanses every imperfection, every sin, every hurt, every failure, every disappointment. It's going to change her relationship status from it's complicated to loved by God. You have to go deep in order to let the Spirit do its cleansing work. And then he says, you Samaritans worship what you don't understand. What's that about? Well, Samaritans were like conservative Jews. They were a group of people who had left the conversation a long time ago. Kind of la 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 la, we don't want to participate anymore. Now think about how hard it was for Pharisees like Nicodemus to believe that the Messiah had come in Jesus of Nazareth. Now think about how much harder it would be for that important information to be received by this conservative group of Samaritans who were so far out of contact with their Jewish cousins. She might have preferred that Jesus didn't go there, not mention her messy social history or her being part of a religious group that had a few chapters missing from their scriptures. But they were both things that were true, and they were both necessary in order for her to receive Jesus, the Messiah. Here's the thing. No one wants to have an awkward conversation. That's why we avoid them. That's why we apply phrases like, hey, don't go there, when someone touches a nerve, or when things start to get a little bit too close for comfort. But if you love someone, then you're willing to risk the awkwardness of a conversation in order to get to truth that will bring transformation. Psychologists point out that humans have this innate need to know that they're loved and to know that they're safe. And in conversations, we often don't go deep with people because we're worried about being rejected. It's a safety concern. Or we often don't go deep because we're scared of revealing something that will cause someone to stop loving us. So it's totally understandable that the woman changed the subject here. But to her credit, she stayed in the conversation and she listened to Jesus. Now, in our current climate, so much of what kills relationships is being quick to react, to get defensive, to deflect, being unwilling to go there. But in this encounter, Jesus demonstrates the power of speaking truth in love, and this woman demonstrates a willingness to stay engaged. Question for us is, can we do the same? Throwing slogans at each other like water balloons is not the most effective way to distribute living water. It's something that has to dive down deep, changing us from within. And this involves relationship. And so, Tri-Valley, I encourage you to make time in your week to break through some barrier, to go somewhere that you've been avoiding, and commit to having a deep, meaningful conversation that's couched in love and rooted in Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah, the one who offers living water. So as you read on in this story, you're going to see that this woman comes to believe what Jesus says. And then she runs to her village and she tells everybody that she's found the Messiah. Jesus ends up staying with the village and he teaches them for 2 days, and many people become believers as well. The message of Jesus, you see, multiplies exponentially because of just one conversation, one relationship, one willingness to go there. Now think of how many people can come to discover the life that Jesus offers because of you and your willingness to engage, to build a relationship, to break down a barrier, and to go there. That's our challenge for us this week, Tri-Valley. I hope that you'll do this faithfully. Blessings.
No way.
What?
No way.
What?
No way.
What?